What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily, and in this video, we're going to be doing a speed test comparison between the Samsung Galaxy A31, the Samsung Galaxy A51, and the Samsung Galaxy A71. These are some of the most popular phones that are out right now. I know a lot of people are thinking about getting one as their next device, but there's a lot of things to consider with these phones that might make one a better option for you. When it comes to their specs and features, they're pretty different phones. So in this video, I'm going to give you some real-world side-by-side comparisons with app launching, gaming, and I'll throw in some speed test performance numbers as well with Antutu and Geekbench, so you can get an objective look at the differences in capabilities. First things first though, I do want to talk about the specs inside each of these phones so you have an understanding of what we're working with. Starting off with the cheapest and least powerful device, the A31 packs the MediaTek Helio P65 processor paired with a Mali G52 GPU and your choice of either 4GB or 6GB of RAM. For this video, I actually have the higher end 6GB version of the A31, so you can see what a maxed out A31 can do, which I think will be helpful for a lot of folks. The A51 offers Samsung's own Exynos 9611 processor paired with the Mali G72 GPU, UFS 2.0 storage, and your choice of either 4, 6, or 8 gigs of RAM. For this video, we'll actually be using the 4GB version of the A51, which is going to be the most common version of this phone, I think, and it offers an interesting look at CPU speeds versus RAM when stacked up against the A31, which I'll talk about in a minute. For the A71, which is currently the highest end 2020 A-series phone out right now, this device packs the Qualcomm Snapdragon 730 chipset and Adreno 618 GPU, UFS 2.1 storage, and either 6 or 8 gigs of RAM. For this video, I have the 8GB version, so the top of the line A71 here. Yes, I know I wish all these phones had the same amount of RAM too, but this is what we're working with, and I think it's still going to be a worthwhile test anyway, since there are a lot of other factors to consider. So to start things off, let's go ahead and run a couple benchmark tests. This first one we'll do is Antutu, and I like this test because although it's pretty long, it takes like 10 or 15 minutes, you can sort of see everything that's being tested, which is interesting. Obviously, it's a pretty graphics intensive benchmark, and it throws in a couple of other little things as well. But in the end, here is what we have. The A31 achieved a total score of 154,502. The A51 did a little better with 179,497, and the biggest jump was with the A71 at 247,268. And just as a side note, if you run these tests on your own device, you may not get this exact score down to the final number, but it should come pretty close as long as you have the same device with the same specs. Also, with this test, you can get a more detailed breakdown of what's actually inside the phones. So if there was any doubt, you can see right there what processor and GPU each device has, which I already went over, and you can also see the total RAM and available RAM. Like I explained at the start of the video, the A31 is maxed out at 6, the A51 has the bare minimum at 4, and the A71 is maxed out at 8. Next up, we'll run Geekbench 5. Fortunately, this test takes a little less time, but I still wanted to speed things up a bit so we could just get through it. These numbers are going to be different than Antutu because their measurements and scores are scaled differently, but in the end, the A31 actually had a single core score of 354 and a multi-core score of 1208. The A51 had a slightly lower single core score of 271 and slightly higher multi-core score of 1262, and as expected, the A71 beat them both out by a decent margin, 554 on the single core test and 1727 on the multi-core. And if you're interested in a more in-depth breakdown of the speed tests, here are a few more numbers and measurements. I won't go over everything here, but if you're interested, you can just pause the video and read through it. Next up, we're just going to go ahead and run through some app launches and UI animations. Now, all three of these phones ship with Android 10 and One UI 2. They've all been updated to their most recent software versions, and I also went ahead and charged them up to 100%, so they'd all be performing at their best. Also, all three of these devices have been set up in exactly the same way. All the same apps and games in all the same spots, and nothing is preloaded. I wanted to just make sure this test is as fair as possible, of course, so hopefully everything looks good. Now, right off the bat, there are a couple of things I want to talk about. First off, yes, it's super hard to get these phones to launch everything at precisely the same time. I did my best, and I hope that's all right. But really, when it comes to the stock Android apps in particular, the difference in load times and performance, I think, is actually pretty insignificant. Now, more often than not, yes, the maxed out, expensive A71 is going to open up an app or load a web page the fastest. But when you actually see these phones work side by side, we're usually talking like a fraction of a second difference, if that. I think the biggest contributing factor to this is simply because of how well optimized Android 10 is on all of these phones. While they aren't flagship devices, Samsung's A series is their mid-range line of phones. I think the overall user experience with stock apps especially, and a handful of third-party apps as well, is really solid. It's fast, smooth, and responsive, and with all three of these phones, I didn't really come across any hang-ups. If I have to pick something out though, this might be unpopular, but I actually think the A51 had a few more blips and hiccups and instances where the A31 beat it out. Yes, the extra RAM helps a little bit, but I guess I was just surprised at how much it helped. It's not every single time, but every once in a while. The A51 has just a snag for a second, while the A31 seems to press on through. When we start to move over to some of the third-party apps, I will say that this is where the A71 pulls ahead, and there's more of a discernible difference between all three phones. Obviously, we aren't talking about anything major still, but a second or two of difference across each device is something you can see pretty easily. And in the long run, those extra load times could start to add up. Now, fortunately, again, I don't really see any devices having any issues, even as we start to load up more and more apps and more things are loaded in the background. The only other thing I just want to keep stressing is that the A31 and A51 keep flip-flopping back and forth as to which device is faster. And that's mainly because of the RAM differences, I think, but the speed times are so close that neither phone seems to have a real advantage. At the end of the day, if you're mainly going to be using your phone to text, browse the web, watch videos, check up on social media, things like that, I don't really think you're going to see a noticeable speed difference for one, and beyond that, I don't feel like you'd be getting your money's worth by going with a higher end, better spec'd phone, unless the higher end device has other features that you want, like a bigger display, better camera, or whatever else. And that's where you feel like you're getting your money's worth. That's just my thought process at this point. You may feel differently. I just don't really see that much of a difference if we're strictly looking at the easy, everyday app launches and load times. As we move over to gaming, this I think is where you're going to see the biggest difference in speed and performance. And likely, this is where some people may feel it's worth spending the extra money. This first game is Asphalt 9 Legends, and you can see that just by launching the game, the A71 beats the A51 by about 2 seconds, and the A31 is several more seconds behind them both. When we actually jump into a race, the countdown timer sort of helps here, and you can see that the A71 beat out the other phones by a couple of seconds once again. When we move over to real racing, launching the app actually produces a different result this time. The A71 of course beats the field, but the A31 loaded up before the A51 in this instance. And once again, when we hop into the race, surprisingly, the A31 was quicker than the A51. This I found kind of interesting. When we launched Call of Duty Mobile, we're back to having the A31 be the slowest and the A71 ahead by a couple more seconds. But when we head on over to PUBG, we're back the other way around again. Now, PUBG is something I want to quickly mention. The A71 finished way ahead of the other two phones in this case, like almost a full minute. I'm not entirely sure what the cause was with that, whether it was a network issue or something else, but that was probably the most surprising thing to happen across the entire test, and I don't really think it's a common thing. When it comes to actually playing these games, I genuinely think all three phones do an awesome job keeping up. If you're getting the A31 and you're hoping to play really anything at all, you're not going to be disappointed. Especially with the 6 gigs of RAM, there's no complaints here. Everything is smooth, even at the highest settings, and while you may be loading into a game a second behind your friends, you aren't missing out on anything performance related. It's the same story with the A51. It's a great gaming phone. I feel like if you have the option though, bumping up the RAM to 6 or 8 gigs is the best option. It's not going to be a super performance boost or anything like that, but I think it brings this phone up to where it really should be. Again, this is a device that's great for gaming, and you certainly won't feel bad not going with the A71 if you want to save a little money and go with this one instead. Of course, the maxed out A71 is the best of the best, but realistically, it's not like I felt this phone performed so much better when I switched between everything. I think with load times, yes, you have an advantage, but the big thing you gain is just a more future-proof device. Getting the Snapdragon processor and the highest amount of RAM, I think will mean this phone has a longer lifespan as apps get more intense and as more software updates come and go. It's more of a long-term investment than the other devices, and that's probably the biggest real advantage. So all in all, here's what I have to say about this test. I think more than anything, this comparison showed really two things. For one, while each phone has pretty different processors, the results aren't as drastic as maybe people like to think. I feel like a MediaTek processor or an Exynos processor tends to get a lot of flack from time to time, but in a real-world side-by-side tests, you're not really getting that much worse performance. And two, I think if you have the option, getting more RAM on a lower tier phone like the A31 for example might be a decent investment if it's still cheaper than a higher end phone. I was honestly surprised to see the A31 beat out the A51 from time to time, but really I guess I shouldn't be that surprised, and that's kind of the point. So there you go. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this speed test comparison between the A71, the A51, and A31. Let me know your thoughts about this test. Were these the results you expected? I'd love to know your thoughts, of course, down below in the comments. Also, be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys later.